One of the things that I most believe in is that great people have an impact that travels so much farther than we actually imagine. And today's guest, my first guest for the fifth season of Cyber Empathy, Vivek Ramachandran, is one of the most generous, empathetic, and honest people in cybersecurity. His story is not just one of building great teams, a great company, now on his second one. It is a story of being generous and vulnerable and having the integrity to pursue your principles and values, even when it is difficult, and especially when it's difficult. Vivek shared some powerful and very personal examples of how he practices empathy and compassion in all contexts across his work, his personal life, and even in the relationship that he has with himself. You'll rarely find someone like Vivek, someone who is so upfront and so honest about what he believes in, what he believes is right, and how he sees our ability to inspire change in this industry. I feel like there have been so many practical examples in this conversation that I can't wait for you to discover them. I can't wait for you to see how that feels, how that looks like, and what ideas you can actually start integrating and pulling into your work today. I feel very lucky and honored to have been able to talk to Vivek. I can't wait to see what he does next. And this conversation really sets the tone for another season where we explore how empathy can transform not just the cybersecurity industry, but the relationships that we influence through technology, the companies we build, the teams that we're part of, the communities to which we contribute. Welcome to the fifth season of Cyber Empathy. I am delighted to have you here, now in video format as well, and I can't wait to share with you this conversation with Vivek Ramachandran and all of the others who will follow. Enjoy. Vivek, such a privilege to have you on the Cyber Empathy podcast. To have someone of your caliber, to have someone with your experience come and talk about all of the less seen things that go into doing everything that you've done and achieving everything that you've achieved so far. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andra. Real privilege and honor to be invited to the show. And I think this is a great initiative, I think which you've been doing for a while. So I was very excited to hear about it, when you reached out to us. And so, yeah, very happy, privileged to be here and looking forward to an amazing conversation.
Appreciate it so much. And something that I want to start with is, what is your, let's say, latest or more recent experience of being on the other side of an empathetic experience? So receiving an act of empathy, and what was that, and what did that feel like?
Yeah. So I can tell you, recently, of course, I've been running this company, SquareX, where, we raised some money. And now I was in Silicon Valley trying to meet up with a lot of founders, just so that I could build out my network and probably take their help in doing a bunch of things, right? And generally, you would kind of imagine that, of course, most of these conversations might end up being very transactional in nature. But it isn't
Hmm.
so. A lot of times, people will surprise you and basically say, hey, I'd love to help you. I don't need anything in return. This is just, me giving back to the universe, just like what I've received. So I can tell you, I won't take names just to protect privacy, but I met the founder of one of the companies, who's raised like a couple of $100 million lately, working in the space of cybersecurity, again, building a very big company. And I met him and I was telling him about our product, and he was very impressed. And that's when I said, hey, I would love for you to introduce us to some of your investors, because I like some of them. And I said, what would you like in return, right? Like, could we maybe give you our product, or, could I get you on as an advisor, or whichever? And and to my astonishment, the gentleman just got back and he basically said, hey Vivek, a lot of people have helped me, along the way, and of course, without expecting anything. And that's really where, look, if I do add eventual value, feel free to, rope me in as an advisor or whatever capacity. But I think the first few times that we're going to meet, whatever help you need, just let me know. I'll help you anyway. And this is just me trying to do what others have done to me. So that really did touch me, because you would feel like, oh, here you are trying to see if you can transactionally kind of like barter a deal of help versus help. And here is someone who's like offering up such great help without expecting anything in return.
That is such an interesting story and an interesting angle. And thank you for sharing that, because we often see in the media things portrayed quite black and white. People are either very good or very bad. The tech culture is either amazing and innovative and world changing, or it's toxic, trying to tear up human nature into pieces and manipulate each of them. And this points out that there are so many nuances and that there are so many good people making good things happen, although that's not as visible. So, really, thank you for sharing that story, because there are a bunch of great people in the ecosystem, in technology in general, in cybersecurity. Because I feel that this space kind of attracts idealists, people who really want to change the world and make it better. And that's actually, part of the essence of being a hacker and the essence of trying to do something that's meaningful. And I was wondering, if you look back, or when you look back at your story and your trajectory so far, um was there like a certain point where empathy played like a really big role, where that human connection was essential for you to end up achieving and building what you've done so far?
Yeah. Well, I think in my case, a lot more than probably what an average person would, face during his career building years. So, I started into cybersecurity, entrepreneurship by starting this free site called securitytube.net. And really, this was a time when I used to live in India, and there was very little from an education wise which was available out in the open. There were these companies who were selling these courses at $10,000 each and whatnot. And it wasn't possible for people in developing countries or underdeveloped countries to be able to afford anything close to that. So securitytube.net, which I started, was really my attempt at, making those high end topics available literally for free to people. uh, and when I did this, at that point of time, I was like, okay, I don't even know whether this is ever going to come back positively to me or not, but I'm just doing it because I felt so strongly about the mission of just, creating free education. Now, as the years rolled by and securitytube.net got popular, and when I finally said, oh, you know what, I'd like to do this for the rest of my life, why not introduce certifications on the site? I still remember I had given out the entire courseware for free, wireless security. And I had told people, if you want to register for a certification, from someone who's totally unknown at that point, you could probably pay $250, somewhere around that. So I sent the email to all the 100,000 free users of securitytube.net just to see if I could make enough money to do this full time. And I send the email, I go out, come back in 2 hours, and the first message I actually see is like, PayPal has blocked my account. And I just couldn't figure out what happened. And then I realized that over 100 people had actually made the payment at that point from the community. So first I thought people had it confused, because I thought no one's going. How would so many people end up paying for something which was free already, right? So I mail all of them, and almost to some extent, when I kind of read the responses, tears in my eyes, because these were people writing saying, "Hey Vivek, we've been following your work for the last 2 to 3 years. We've been learning all of this, which otherwise there was no real source to learn at all. And now that there is an outlet for us to help you back, to show the same kindness, empathy back, we feel like many of us now have jobs and we are kind of like capable of doing it, and hence we are going ahead and purchasing a certification for a course which is entirely free." So that really was the starting point of how I managed to go ahead and do everything full time, and then things compounded. Uh, so I would say a lot of times, when you do these acts and just give it out to the universe, not really expecting anything in return, that's really where, when things come back around, you just get enormously surprised, because inherently I think people want to help each other, right? I think what's happened is the way society has developed. uh, right now we all search for, hey, is the person to some extent even trustworthy, that this help would kind of add value to him, or he in turn would end up helping others, right? So it's become a little bit like that today in society, because of the way things are a lot more transactional than previously. But I feel inherently people want to help one another, and I think once people see that you are a genuine person, you have yourself shown empathy towards a mission, towards a cause, towards a community, towards people, whether cybersecurity or beyond. Uh, when there arises an opportunity, people do give back, and I think SecurityTube.net, a lot of the early career in my own life, is a perfect example. And most important thing, Andra, is this wasn't just people in India. This was really people in around 40, 50 different countries, people I never met. This was all pre-Zoom days. So I would just shoot these videos and put it. So there were no conversations, right? For many of these folks, the only way I knew them was their handles in the comments that they had made, which is their, hacker nicknames, or hacker aliases, or, whatever you want to call it. So for me, sitting in that small bedroom, in Bombay, India, for me to visualize these hundreds of people around the world, and I'm even thinking, like, what's going through their mind, that they then, and what value I might have added, that these guys are all willing to kind of show that kindness to me. So anyway, I mean, like, that's how everything started. So I'm a very, very strong believer of what you are advocating. So
Thank you, which makes it all the more of a wonderful, deeply meaningful experience to have you here and to be able to see these experiences in a way that really amplifies them, and in a way that confirms that people who are generous and honest and vulnerable in this community have a lot to gain, and that we don't have to put up the hustler, I want to do everything, I'm the best face on when we show up into community, because there's space for all sorts of manifestations, and the more genuine and authentic and real you are, the more you have to gain in the long term. Although you might get all sorts of feedback every now and then, which is natural. This is the internet. It has there's actually a saying in Romania that no forest is without its kind of dried up dead trees. So it's kind of, the internet is a forest, and some parts of it are not as welcome in, but it's still definitely worth engaging with dishonesty, and just in a way that's meaningful. I'm really curious, have you ever met in person part of the people who were there, part of that experience, and part of that moment in your life?
yeah. So I think, a couple of years later, when I started doing a lot more security conferences around the world, and I used to go to these conferences, then I ended up meeting a lot of these people, who were students of Pentester Academy, our customers, people who advocated their entire teams in their companies to join Pentester Academy, and kind of like whatnot. And those were very surreal moments, because when someone walks up to you, and for the most part, I've been an online teacher, right? Like, at least the early part of my career. So you never really seen the students, and most of the time you're just looking at a camera, recording your video, hoping this is addressing the needs of even the student who knows nothing about the topic. So for people to walk up to me in these conferences and tell me that, hey, Vivek, your videos kind of really helped me get this job. This was the way I finally learned like shell coding and started looking at exploit research. Hey, your videos on Python programming for pen testers, like, that was a breakthrough course which finally pushed me as an IT security guy to learn the basics of programming and automation. Uh, so I think I feel really very honored, almost super lucky. This is what I tell my kids, everybody who asks me, is I said, hey, I'm super lucky, because when I made those videos, I never ever imagined that the impact of those videos would be so massive, and that so many people would use it to actually go ahead and better themselves, get a better career, get a better job. And I think those were very, very. I used to go to conferences. People say, "Hey, I'm going to buy you a free beer if you're available," because at the very least, the respect I can show you is this. I mean, the most unbelievable part, Andra, there were people who walked up and said, "I haven't ever paid for a Pen Tester Academy course. I've pirated it, but I just want to tell you that the pirated course or your pirated book on wireless security immensely helped me, and now that I can actually pay, and I work for a company, I am advocating my entire team to take Pentester Academy." So those are a few moments where you don't know how to react, because as a creative person who's created something, piracy is always bad. I would never advocate that as an alternate form of any expression. uh, but in that very moment, I'm also thankful that I just feel like, okay, you know what, it doesn't matter beyond a point that we weren't compensated for it, but the fact that it changed your life, and you are humble enough to kind of walk up, respectful enough to walk up, have the integrity to tell me that you actually used a pirated version, and now you're trying to do things right. So yeah, I mean, like, so a lot of interesting such encounters at these conferences.
And that's why it's so worth going to conferences. I've heard people, well, since 2020, I've seen people talk about, oh, we don't need events anymore, like we can do things online, it costs too much, it's not worth the effort. Oh, but it
Yeah,
is so much worth the effort. It's not, it's incomparable to be there with people in the same space, having these experiences, having these conversations, having this level of connection, which just does not happen online as much as we try, because it's not for lack of trying. But these, you just don't make memories like these without being in the same room. That's definite.
absolutely. And I feel like maybe human beings, as social animals, and the way our own kind of biological evolution is, I think we tend to make connections when literally all our senses get activated. Eyes, ears, nose, everything gets activated, and we perceive a person using all of those senses. It probably creates a much better social connection maybe in our mind, because to your point, when the pandemic happened and people were on Zoom, for a bit everybody felt, oh wow, I don't have to travel, I don't have to meet anyone, and here you go, I just had this conversation. uh, but you tend to see that if you do that for a very long time, you still fully haven't experienced the person's emotions, right? You haven't still had a cash. I know people have done like Zoom lunch dates and whatnot, right? Like where I am eating, you are eating, things like that. But I feel like there's still nothing which can beat experiencing time with a person in person. Whether it is just a casual walk or sitting grabbing a coffee, talking about not just transactional but more impersonal things, and that seems to leave a much stronger imprint of the person as a social being. And I also feel people you meet, you have a lot more empathy, a lot more, I would say, regard towards when it eventually comes to offline conversations.
So true. This is why you travel to Silicon Valley, like from the other part of the other side of the world. This is why people travel. This is why they feel like, meeting up in person. And I do have to say, I am a bit jealous of people in the US who get to go to DEF CON so easily every year, and meet up and have these awesome experiences. But that's on my list for some point, for at some point in my life. Something that I wanted to ask you, because it's, being a kind, generous, empathetic person comes easily to you, because you've practiced this, you do this with intent. But when was it hard for you to practice all of these things? What were, let's say, the moments or experiences when this was actually challenging? Because it's not always easy, even for the people who are, let's say, a bit more, not, I don't want to say wired for it, because I think that we all are wired for empathy and for connection, but rather, when does it feel more challenging? When does it require more effort? Because I feel that that's valuable as well. Maybe, people who haven't practiced this as much or thought about it as much, feel like, oh, it's so easy for everyone else, but not me, which is not true. It's sometimes it's hard all of us, definitely.
I think two occasions, right? The first is when people probably lie to be a recipient of empathy and kindness. And I'll give you an example, right?
Mm,
There were people. There was one gentleman who wrote to me a long time back that he was disabled and trying to find a job, and getting access to Pen Tester Academy for free could change his life. And if along with that we could also have him give the certifications and everything for free. uh, and I said, hey, you know what, absolutely. I never asked for any form of proof of disability or any of that. I just chose to believe the person, and gave them full access. And then later, of course, when they were doing the certification exams, you get to know the name because that's what goes on the certificate and whatnot. And later we figured out that this person wasn't disabled at all, and everything was absolutely fine, and he had a regular job. And where my team came down a little heavily on me, saying like, hey, I think we should like go ahead and verify, right? As they say, trust but verify or whatnot. and
mm,
and those are times when you ask yourself like, okay, how do you even go about this, right? Like, I mean, people from all over the world used to write in. I want to balance making sure that we are still able to run and function as a business, my team is paid, while also doing good, while also helping people, right? Education is all about helping people when I did Pentester Academy. uh, but at that time, I quickly decided that you will always have bad experiences in your life, but your bad experiences should not shape your judgment, moving forward. Instead, you should, you probably look at bad experiences as one off, and just say, look, this isn't going to happen, every single time. There's just one, bad apple, or lack of a better word, who probably tried to cheat you. But this wouldn't mean that the very next person who approaches us with a similar request, I would want to go all becoming a detective to see if this is true or not. So I think in many of these things, I've always decided to take a moral high ground and say it's fine. I hope that even with our course, he managed to learn something, but still continue to kind of like do good to whoever approaches with
mm.
something which I feel is a serious impairment to learning, to going ahead up in their career, or to earning eventually a livelihood. That is one. The second is when you yourself are going through tough times, right? uh, because that is super difficult. So I think when the pandemic hit and there were massive layoffs, uh, many of my closest friends who unfortunately did get laid off, they basically asked me if I could just offer them a job, right? If I could go ahead, and maybe even they'd be willing to take a pay cut, because our business was still doing well and all of that. uh, so those are times when it's very difficult, right? So where in most of those cases, what I did was I told them, look, on a personal basis, I might be able to help you, probably lend you a bit of money if it is really that bad. But I think as a company, I need to stick to our core principles of hiring. Make sure we hire when we need, and when it's done, it's transparent. It is done with being an equal opportunity employer, where we invite applications from the world, rather than creating this little backdoor channel for my friends and family. So those are times, of course, as you can imagine, people also tend to misunderstand you, uh, and I feel like those are the most difficult times, right? Like, to say no to people close to you, where they feel all it would have taken for you is that one small decision, and they would have
Mm.
received help. I think, yeah, I mean, those are probably the two times when showing any form of empathy, trying your very best to be kind, uh, is difficult. But my whole radar for all of this has been, take a moral high ground, always make sure that you do everything with high integrity, be consistent in the way that, frankly, you even show empathy or kindness, so that you are more predictable to everybody around you. uh, Rather
Mm.
than for the same situation saying yes to someone but no to someone else.
I feel like this is the essential playbook for empathy. Like, what are the things that I could be looking at if I want to practice this, and how does this tie to my overall life? How does it elevate the way that I work, the way that I develop relationships, the way that I manage my relationships with close people. So I really appreciate you sharing this personal story, and for being so vulnerable, and for always kind of walking the talk, for always practicing what you preach. That consistency is so important and so valuable, because it shows us that it is worth doing this even when it's hard, and especially when it is hard and life comes at us with a lot of different things. You've gone through all of these stages of building a company, of selling it, which I cannot imagine how much of a difficult thing it is, especially emotionally, to let go of something that is so deeply ingrained into your life, not just in your like professional um, life, but in your life in general. And what I wanted to kind of know and learn from you is how you practice self-compassion. How do you show yourself all of the things that you so easily show other people? Because what I've seen sometimes is that for some people, it's easier to do this for others, but when it comes to themselves, they really push themselves and hold themselves to sometimes unrealistic standards. And practices self-compassion and self-empathy, I feel is a really kind of difficult things to understand and to experience, and then to eventually practice.
Right. I mean, you're right, right? This is very difficult. I would say that, at least in my case, uh, different phases in life, I guess, depending on what you want in that phase of life. And I always say that every 10 years, what you fundamentally want actually changes, right? Whether in life, career, relationships, whatever, right? Uh, and generally, when you meet someone after 10 years, you tend to realize, at least in a couple of dimensions, they're a very different person now.
Mm.
Life's experiences, their own needs. So I guess the early years I neglected that quite a bit, right? So I started off with nothing, absolutely ground zero, first generation, entrepreneur. So I think at that point I was fairly unkind and fairly merciless when it came to me, which is I used to literally spend all my time just working, not taking care of myself at all, literally just doing whatever it took to kind of like make things work. And maybe there are these phases in everybody's life where you kind of tend to do that. But if that phases extends to too long, I guess when it comes to both mental sanity, physical sanity, things do start getting affected, right? Because we aren't machines which are expected to just keep working till our circuits blow out. Our organic circuits unfortunately need a lot more upkeepment, that too in a multi-dimensional way, right? Like, so I think once I probably hit my mid 30s, now I'm 43, but when I hit my mid 30s, at that point I started realizing that, okay, it's important probably to kind of carve out time for other things as well, right? Family,
Mm.
more importantly for yourself as well. So I think roughly around mid 30s, late 30s was when I started taking all of that very seriously. I decided that, hey, it's very, very important to carve out some amount of time just to think about what I want outside of career, outside of work and all of that, and make sure that almost on a weekly basis to satisfy some of those checkpoints and bullets as well, right? Something as silly and trivial as, I like certain kind of clothes, I like to wear a lot of color and I enjoy it, so just go, on a little shopping spree, buy whatever you want. Or something a little bit more kind of long haul as, okay, do I want to just go out on a slightly long work vacation where I go meet people? So I used to be a very introverted person, Andra. You won't believe this. I barely talk to anybody apart from the computer screen. And that's when I even started going to the conferences and people started approaching me, I used to find that fairly intimidating, because I wasn't a very social early on, when talking, meeting people. So I think what I started doing is, with my conferences, I used to carve out 3 or 4 days where I could just go explore the country, the city, wherever I was, all alone, just traveling around, just me, my thoughts. In recent times, I think, now that I'm 43, I mean, still young, but in recent times, I've started also forcing myself to think about, kind of the mortality of life itself, and
Mm.
basically saying like, hey, look, our time in this world is limited, so it's important that you do ration enough time for yourself. Make sure your own personal desires, whatever you wanted to do, all of those things are also taken care of. uh, and I guess that's how your own philosophy around what you want from others and yourself kind of like evolves. So I still do hold myself to sometimes a very unrealistic demand. So to give you an example, all over the weekend we were at Comic Con doing something, but here I am like Monday morning, like 9 a.m. Right? And right before, I just took like two team members to like a lunch who kind of helped us out in Comic Con and everything. So, a lot of folks told me, oh, maybe I should just take a break today because, I've been like working nonstop. I can tell you, I
Mm.
haven't taken a single annual leave in the past 2 years, right? Not a
Oof.
single. Uh, but many of these things I'm now trying to like slowly fix is simply because I feel like even though I don't mentally feel the need sometimes, but I say, you know what, that's just uh, your force feeding your mind that you don't need something, right? Like everybody needs a break. So be a little kind to yourself, don't have to hold yourself up to that high of a work regard and all. I would honestly say I think it's still a work in progress. Like many days I do, but there are weeks at a stretch where I don't, and I'm trying to find that balance, and that is the true answer.
It definitely feels true and it feels honest. And
Yeah.
I love that you have people around you that also see this and that help you take care of you more, because that's so important to have people around us who hold up that mirror and
Right.
tell us when we're doing too much, when we're on the verge of excess, whether it is work, whether it is anything else. So we have that ability to have that moment of awareness when we're like really neck deep in something and we've forgotten about everything else, to have
Right.
that moment of awareness where like, oh, maybe I am doing too much, maybe I could do something, just a little something for myself today. So I love that I've had the opportunity to talk to some of the people in your team, and that we've had like such an instant connection, which I'm so grateful for. And I can tell not just from this example, but I from everything that kind of transpires from your work, that you have this incredible ability to surround yourself and to build teams that are truly great and made of wonderful people that practice all of the things that we've talked about so far. And I was wondering if you could share like how you're doing this at SquareX right now, and how much of a sense of reward and connection you get from building a team like this, and from finding people with this kind of set of values and principles.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think, Andra, what tends to happen is most job interviews center purely around skills. And then in the very last round, somebody from HR appears with a canned set of questions, most of which again centers around, what you were paid in your last job and all of that, right? At SquareX, what I tend to do is like once, whether it's technical or non-technical interviews complete, whether I do it or somebody else in the team, what I like to do is with every potential new hire, sit down and understand their background, their motivations, and what they really want to do in their career. Most importantly, I think what they absolutely have disliked about workplaces, right? Because I think, generally over time, you're very sure about what you dislike. You may not have a massive list, a complete list of what you like, but the list of what you dislike, is fairly short, but very, very particular for most people. So what I tend to do is I also give people a full view of how work would look like, right? There is no smoke and mirrors. There is no like, oh, you know what, this is it. So I tell people, I said, hey, look, the stage of the company where we are at during the interview process is like, this is very demanding, but very rewarding. So if you want to join a company where you want to learn a lot, be given a lot of responsibility, be at the forefront of leading different efforts, be given a lot of autonomy, then understand that all of these great powers come with great responsibility, just like Spider-Man said, right? Or I guess his uncle said, I don't know who did. uh, so I tell them like, hey, you can't have all of this, but at the very same time, like no responsibility, right?
Mm.
So I think I feel like that is a very, very good weeding process in itself. There have been a lot of people who've kind of told me during the interview that, hey, I absolutely appreciate this because I feel like where I am in my personal life, I wouldn't want to shoulder such a heavy responsibility, even though I may be willing probably to learn here or there, but this makes sense, and hence this is not a right fit for me at all. The other thing I generally like to do is like I always like to pay people above market. And the simple reason is there are only two things generally a person thinks about when he's at work, right? Which is, of course, the quality of the work experience and what is he working on. The second is he being fairly compensated for the same?
Mm.
And and the reason I tend to compensate above market always is because I want the monetary aspect to be a moot point in your mind when you're operating every day at work. And you tell yourself, hey, the company's been fair, it's given me a massive amount of responsibility, gives me a massive amount of flexibility where, Vivek isn't like knocking, on my shoulder with like what happened in the last 1 hour, right? Zero micromanagement. Uh, but that automatically means that, hey, I would need to shoulder responsibility. I would need to figure, everything out end to end. And I generally feel like when employees feel that you trust them, but you also hold them accountable to what you've trusted, I think the best works come out. Uh, Also, what I generally do is when someone comes to me and say this didn't work, I generally ask them, what's the next plan? Like, tell me, what are you going to do to fix it? I don't spend too much of time, fixated about, oh, this didn't, but why, give me an explanation why you feel this didn't work and what's the next plan. So my philosophy has always been don't waste too much time on sunk cost. Uh, Last but not the least, most important, everybody makes mistakes, including myself. So I generally tend to brush mistakes off. So if somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, I made that mistake. I think I should have done this. Oh, something went wrong," and I'm like, "That's fine. Let's move on. It's not a big deal. Let's move on." Because what tends to happen is when you create a workplace which is oversensitive to mistakes, I think everybody starts to guard themselves, right? And then there is no level of empathy or understanding between each other. Colleagues don't want to help each other because everybody has like an armor on and they want to protect themselves.
Mhm.
So to your point, Andra, what I tend to do is very transparent process, very direct about what my expectation is. Make sure people are compensated fairly. Tell them it's okay to make mistakes. Tell them it's okay that things don't work till the time you've already thought about the next plan and you're starting to execute on that. Uh, and last but not the least, I think, which is more important, is keeping a very, very absolutely transparent open door policy. So even though a lot of folks, I may not supervise directly, I 100% ensure that in a month I at least speak to everybody one on one, right? And my questions generally are, what isn't working, or if I see that there is a colleague versus colleague issue, I generally just call both of them together. I never do separate meetings, right? So that fosters a zero politics place, and I can tell you, you just do that, and you'll kind of see like people are starting to show kind of empathy and kindness towards each other. People want to help each other. They are very excited because they know that they don't have to protect themselves. All they have to do is work to create a great company.
Oh, and this is why I love what's coming out of SquareX. And I feel like we're just seeing not even the tip of the iceberg, just we're just watching it from afar.
Yeah.
And we've just spotted it in the ocean and we're about to discover so much more. Ah, that was such a beautiful way, the way you put all of these elements together in a way that feels so honest, but also so and motivating, so conducive of like really meaningful work, and not being, not stumbling on the usual stuff that people complain about. There are so many. It feels like such a simple way of doing things, not easy but simple when you
Right.
follow these principles and actually, walk the talk on them. And speaking of a great team builds a great product. This is something that I truly believe in. A great team. I will work with a great team on anything from software to anything else, because I believe in a group of people that is determined to change something for the better. And this is the kind of company and team that you've built at SquareX. And I'm wondering, since it's such a deep tech type of product, where does empathy for, what role does empathy play in this? Because the way that you've articulated the messaging and the change that you're trying to make is very, very focused on what people actually need in this in our day and age. And I can't help but think of what you said, that every 10 years things change, and it feels like it's time for that big of a change in the defensive cybersecurity industry for home users such as myself. So again, just to go back to my question, what role does empathy play and how you're building this product?
Yeah, I think very good question. So I think, I mean, I'm a firm believer that corporations should probably contribute in some meaningful way to their own like social responsibility, right? And there are very different ways that you can approach it. Larger companies have employees spend like a day or 2 days in a year going and helping out somewhere, maybe teaching at an orphanage, so on and so forth and whatnot, right? In our case, what I wanted to do was genuinely see if there was a way to help end users get more secure. And of course, with every company, you have a paid product. But this is really where we finally decided that, hey, the best way is to have a freemium tier, but which is very, very functional for most ordinary users, right? So as a very simple example, what you'd kind of find is like with SquareX's free product, you can already today go ahead and protect your identity, open up things which may be suspicious and malicious and whatnot. And the idea really is that as we build the product more and more, many of these features, which we feel probably solve for 70 to 80% of end user security problems when they browse the web, will all be part of the freemium model. So that way, what happens is, if I look at my dad, my mom, children, they could just use the SquareX extension absolutely for free and still have a very good amount of protection vis-a-vis not having it. While people who are more power users, professionals who work, enterprises, of course, who are already buying security products, those are the ones who are buying and technically in a way kind of subsidizing part of the cost of giving stuff out in a freemium way. So this was honestly the same thing I tried to do with Pentester Academy as well, which is we had very, very deep technical courses that many others were charging thousands of dollars for. But I decided that, hey, Pentester Academy would be a flat out, $39 a month subscription, which is super affordable, in even developing countries, right? And being from India, I fully understand that beyond a certain amount, it is just prohibitively expensive for people to kind of like shell out on security, right? Which most people tend to equate with buying insurance, right? So I think, yeah, I mean, so that I feel like as the company starts to get bigger, definitely there are other initiatives that we would want to be part of. One interesting thing, I feel like as a way of giving back is for us to release things in the open source community. And these are all
Mm.
what I would believe is more technology, empathy, which is you are contributing to the community, but in a very different way from how a traditional act of kindness would kind of like look like. Given we are working in all of these deep technical subjects, the thought process was this year onwards, or rather 2024 onwards, we would be speaking at a lot of the top conferences, putting out open source software, putting out our research so that even others can learn, and even maybe for what it's worth, even other competitors can look at what we are doing and who knows, even imbibe. And interestingly, this is something I know everybody quotes Elon Musk almost in a cliche way, but he had actually opened up all of Tesla's patents so that anyone, could go ahead and probably use them to create better electric cars, and not trying to protect that as something only his company could. So really thinking about making the whole ecosystem of security products better is the way I'm kind of hoping that we are able to build this company and show our way of empathy, towards the community, towards cybersecurity, and hopefully, people appreciate that and reciprocate.
I am sure that there's going to be a ripple effect, because there always is, and your journey so far is a testament of that. Your message traveled so far. The example that you said, the work that you did and so generously shared, it's all kind of reverberating and constantly having effects, because once you put something out there, it becomes a shared experience with someone else. The moment that they see it, they read it, they watch it, they work with it, it really becomes a shared experience. Which is why I'm such a huge advocate of people like contributing what they know and doing these things in public, which is how I learned so much about the security industry, about communication in general, about psychology. I've learned so much from people just sharing what they know and their unique perspectives. I wouldn't be the same person that I am today at work, in my relationships, and in the relationship that I have with myself, if it wasn't for all of these things that happen in public. And I'm very grateful for that, and very grateful for your stories and for your contribution today. Just one thing that I want to wrap up this conversation with is a question that's around, how do you believe we might be able to get more people to consider the impact of compassion and empathy in their work and in their life, especially in this field that there's always an almost infinite amount of things to learn, especially on the technical side. And we might feel like we don't have enough energy to do all of the emotional labor things. We might not have enough energy to care about the perceived fluff and soft skills. What do we tell them to give them, just open the door and leave the door open for them to explore how they can genuinely just improve their lives in a way that's meaningful and powerful for them through these kind of abilities, let's call
Yeah,
them.
I think that's a very great question. The best example I can actually give you, Andra, is I don't know if you heard about ever heard about Hackers for Charity, which this guy Johnny Long had created. So what he had done is,
Mhm.
he'd gone to Africa, and then I think he had set up like a computer center at some of the schools or something, and then he had actually requested the entire cybersecurity community to either contribute their time or their old machines, or whatever that they could spare. And he used to go around in all of these bigger conferences soliciting this. So interestingly, I mean, I don't know where the project is today, but back then, a lot of people kind of contributed their time, even went down to, I think, that place in Africa. I don't remember the country right now, and spend time teaching children and whatnot. So I would say a lot of the social media, I mean, cybersecurity influencers should lead the way, because what tends to happen is, people listen, you have a voice. The second most important thing I would say, that conferences should carve out at least like one slot or a panel discussion or something around it, because what tends to happen is most people, as we discussed, want to show empathy, want to show kindness, want to contribute, but really this isn't the thing on the top of their mind, right? It's probably couple of layers below, and any time there is an activation of that discussion, that's really when it kind of goes top of their mind, and they're like, oh, you know what, I had thought about something. So I feel like now that post-COVID conferences are again getting back to, the whole big vibrant sizes that they were before. Conference organizers should probably do panel discussions around like how we can contribute. Uh, you know, how can people talk about, empathy towards each other, kindness, as you said. Even a lot more self-awareness, mental health, so many other different things. And I feel like generally what I've found is once conferences start talking about it, it almost kind of mainstream legitimizes it in cybersecurity, right? Because it's no longer like a backroom conversation. It's no longer like, oh, you know what, if you're talking about some of these things like mental health, does that mean that, you're weak? Does that mean that you're going through something, right? It kind of takes away all the stigma around like why are these people having this conversation? uh, so I feel that is very, very important as well, because anything which slowly starts to go mainstream in conferences, I think a lot more people who were on the fences become a lot more freer to immediately contribute to, right? Yeah, so those would be like my 2 cents on how we could make this happen. And again, what you're doing is incredible, right? And that's when Junis told me, I was like, hey, this is incredible. I've literally, I don't know of any other podcast who's taking the initiative to talk about this. And that's really where, when Junis told me, I like immediately agreed and said, hey, I think this is a great initiative. We should definitely support Andra in whatever way we can. I mean, at the very least is to kind of show up, on her podcast. But hey, other things, happy to help in any way we can.
Thank you so much, Vivek. It's been honestly just an honor to have you here, to be able to learn from you, to be able to hear all of these stories and share them with people who care. There's this saying from someone, well, a leader in not just marketing, but let's say change, called Seth Godin, who has deeply influenced my life. And he says that we could aim for doing meaningful work with people who care. And this is, I feel, what happened today. We got to have a conversation that has meaningful impact and a lot of practical examples and implications with someone who truly deeply cares. So thank you so much for this. It has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andra, once again for having me on the show, and keep up this great work. As I said, this is a massively valuable contribution that you're making, and I'm very sure in the next few years, this thing that you're doing is going to be at the very center of a larger movement. So all the best, and we are always cheering, from the sidelines, and we're always happy to help in any way that we can to further your initiative. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Vivek.